This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game features a bunch of brand new commanders, and I'm excited to introduce Arja, who typically plays on my modern streams, into EDH. He's decided to bring along his Vishgraz the Doomhive deck, keeping Golgari Rot Farm, Fetid Heath, Ash Barrens, Rampant Growth, Ruthless Technomancer, Shamanic Revelation, and Alish Norn Grand and Cenobite. Kevin has paired up his Vhal with Noble Heritage, keeping Swords to Plowshares, Soul Ring, Command Tower, Plains, Temple of Enlightenment, and Bonder's Enclave. Mika is playing his newly made Sidar Jabari of Zafir, keeping Tainted Field, Reflections of Littjara, Swamp, Sunken Hollows, Felwar Stone, and Worthy Knight. Last but not least, I want to smash some face with Halana and Alena partners, keeping Soul Ring, Mountain, Fierce Empath, Wood Elves, Gamble, Lotus Cobra, and a Biophagus. Yes, I know. Alright. Chat, this is it.
Don't put too many spoilers in the chat. Yes.
This is
Just put a lot of exclamation points,
baby.
Anyway, Mika wins the die roll and starts us off. He plays a tap Sunken Hollow. Kevin plays a tap Temple of Enlightenment, scrying 1. I've got a mountain, and I cast Soul Ring, and then tap the Soul Ring for Ozolith. Arja displays a forest. Mika plays a Tainted Field and casts Felwar Stone. Kevin plays a Plains and casts his own Soul Ring, and then casts Noble Heritage, passing to me. I draw, but it's not a land, so I cast Gamble. In response, Arja land cycles his Ash Barrens, going to find a basic, and I also go to find a land. I then let Mika pick the card, discarding Fierce Empath. I then play a Rockfell Vale and cast Wood Elves, passing as I search for a land. Arja plays a Swamp for turn and casts Rampant Growth. Mika's got a Swamp for turn as well, and doesn't have a ramp spell, but is able to cast Sidar Jabari. Kevin plays a Command Tower, and casts his commander as well, casting Vhal. He gets the Noble Heritage trigger as she enters, and I take it on my Wood Elves, and Mika takes it on his commander, and Kevin takes it on his commander as well. In my main phase, I cast Biophagus, and then an Incubation Druid, and pass. Arja casts a Caustic Caterpillar in his main phase, and then bounces the forest he used to pay for it after playing a tapped Golgari Rot Farm. He passes after that. Mika draws and goes to combat. He swings his commander at me and gets the Eminence trigger, discarding Alenda and Azor. I then take the hit for commander damage, and Mika is able to bring back Alenda and Azor back onto the field. In his second main phase, he then plays Reflections of Littjara, naming Knight, and passes turn. Kevin's upkeep triggers the Noble Heritage, and Kevin, Arja, and I add 2+1/+1 counters to one of our creatures. Kevin then plays a Rogue's Passage for his land for turn, and then casts Thousand Year Elixir. He then taps Vhal to float some colorless mana, and untaps her with the Elixir, and uses the floating mana to foretell a card. I've got a tapped Oran Reef coming into play for turn, and then tap enough for Primal Vigor, which is going to be fun with all these effects on the field. I then cast a Lotus Cobra using the Biophagus, which comes in with 2+1/+1 counters onto it. Moving to combat, I swing the Wood Elves at Mika, who blocks the Alenda and Azor. With the Elves dying, I get to transfer the +1/+1 counters on them onto the Ozolith, and pass after that. Arja plays a Forest for turn, and then taps enough for Vishgraz. This has him getting 6 Might tokens instead of the usual 3, thanks to Primal Vigor, and he passes after that. Mika passes through his phases, going straight to combat, and he swings his commander at Kevin. He gets his eminence trigger, drawing and discarding a card. Before moving to damage though, Kevin casts Swords to Plowshares and exiles Sidar Jabari. Mika has his commander going to the command zone and gaining some life. He then moves to his second main phase and plays a command tower. He casts an Acclaimed Contender, and there's a bit of a slight mix-up at this point involving the Primal Vigor and Reflections token, and we end up thinking Mika gets 3 when it should only be 2. Thankfully chat eventually corrects us, so there's only one instance of this happening. The first Enter the Battlefield trigger finds him a Marshal of Zhalfir. The second finds him a Yars Oathsworn. And the third finds him a Lochlane Lancer. He then passes, and during his end step, he pays the 4 life to make 4 tokens with Alena and Azor, which would normally be 2, but are doubled thanks to the Primal Vigor. Kevin gets his upkeep trigger, and Kevin, Arja, and I add more counters to our creatures, thanks to the Noble Heritage. He then plays a Bonder's Enclave, and at this point, we realize the issue with the Reflections and Vigor, and since the Lancer was the last card Mika got, he puts it on the bottom of his library. Kevin then snaps his fingers before tapping Vhal to make a bunch of colorless, and then untaps her with the Elixir. He then uses 8 remaining colorless to help cast Planar Bridge, and then activates it. This lets him tutor for a permanent card, and we see Diviner's Wand coming into play. Kevin then taps Vhal for more mana, equipping her with the Wand, and using the remaining floating mana by activating Vhal with a new ability the Wand grants, drawing twice. I draw for turn and cast Halana and Alena, using the Biophagus so she comes in with 2 +1/+1 counters. I then cast a Gene Stealer, who comes in with 4 +1/+1 counters, and once it's resolved, tapped Oran Reef to add 2 more +1/+1 counters to the creatures that came in this turn. Moving to combat, I layer my triggers so that the Ozolith will go off first, and I target the Gene Stealer with Halana and Alena's trigger. First, I move over the +1/+1 counters from the Ozolith onto my commander, which get doubled. And then I get to add 10 +1/+1 counters to the Gene Stealer, which becomes 20. It's now at 27/27, and I swing it at Arja. I get the on attack trigger from it, removing a +1/+1 counter from it, and go to find a basic. He decides not to block, and takes 26, and I pass. Arja plays a Plains and taps 4 mana to cast a Ruthless Technomancer. It comes in, and he sacrifices the Caustic Caterpillar, gaining 14 treasure tokens. 5 of them then go into casting a Shamanic Revelation, and he draws 8 cards. He then uses more treasures to cast Elesh Norn, which surprisingly only wipes out Mika's Knight tokens. Moving to combat, the Mites go on the offense, and he swings all 6 of them at Mika. Mika blocks one of them, and then flashes in a Blacklands Paragon to give Alenda and Azor lifelink and Death Touch, but the Paragon dies immediately because of Elesh Norn's static ability. Mika then takes the rest, but more notably, gains 5 poison counters. In his second main phase, Arja then casts a Harvest Season, and goes to find 5 basics, passing while searching. Mika's main phase has Rally the Ranks come in, and he names Knights. He then plays the earlier revealed Marshal of Zhalfir, getting a token copy of it from the Reflections. Going to combat, he swings the token copy of the Acclaimed Contender at Arja, and gets the Eminence trigger from his commander, drawing a card and discarding a card. Arja blocks, and in his second main phase, Mika plays out a Marsh Flats, cracking it and losing 1 to find a Plains. He shortcuts first though, casting an Orzhov Signet, and then uses the Mana Rocks to foretell a card before passing. During his end step, he loses 4 more life to make 4 more tokens from Alenda and Azor. Kevin adds more counters to Vhal, and Arja and Mika take him up on it as well. He then draws, pumping up Vhal by +1/+1 and flying from the Wand, and then plays an island for a turn in his main phase. Kevin then activates Vhal to make some mana, and untaps her with the Elixir. He uses the floating mana to activate Planar Bridge, and goes to grab a Flaming Fist, and then swings Vhal at me. Arja's worried he'll be next though, and uses Path to Exile targeting Vhal, but Kevin casts his Foretold card, Saw It Coming, to counter with the removal. I then get taken out by one lethal commander hit, and once that's done, Kevin passes turn. Arja's main phase has Huatli, Radiant Champion coming into play, and he upticks her to add a bunch of loyalty counters to her. He then rips through his turn, casting a Farseek to find a land and a Phyrexian Arena. He passes while searching for a land. Mika draws for turn and plays a Plains. He swings at Arja with the Knight tokens that have lifelink since they're now large enough to live through Elesh Norn. Arja blocks 3 of them, taking 2, while Mika gains 8 life. Mika also remembers his Eminence trigger, drawing a card and discarding a card. Moving to his second main phase, Mika casts a Promise of Loyalty, but Kevin pumps the brakes on it with an Arcane Denial. Mika then passes, and during the end step, Arja uses Vanishing Verse to exile Vhal. Once more, Mika also loses 4 life to make 2 tokens with Alena and Azor. Kevin draws in his upkeep while Mika draws 2, and Kevin draws for turn. Kevin then plays out a Ponder, looking at his top 3, and putting them back, and then drawing 1. He then plays a Scavenger Grounds for land for turn, and goes a bit crazy with mana rocks, casting Azorius Signet, Midnight Clock, and then Thought Vessel, passing after that. Arja loses 1 to his arena, drawing a card, and draws for turn. He then downticks Huatli to her ultimate, gaining an emblem that'll draw him a card whenever a creature enters. He then plays an Eldrazi Displacer, and draws a card as it enters. He then taps enough for Vishgraz, only getting 3 mites this time, and drawing a total of 4. 2 mana then gets him a Talisman of Hierarchy, and he uses it by tapping it for colorless to activate the Eldrazi Displacer, bouncing his commander. Once more, Vishgraz comes in with another 3 tokens, drawing Arja another 4 cards. He then casts an Eerie Interlude, blinking all of his non-token creatures. This has them coming back during his end step, drawing him 7 more cards, making some more mites, and he sacrifices his commander to the Technomancer again, making more treasures. Before leaving the end step though, Mika also activates the Marshal of Zhalfir to tap down Elesh Norn while Arja is discarding down to 7. Mika draws for turn and goes to combat. He swings Alenda and Azor at Arja, and the Vampire tokens at Kevin. Kevin has nothing, while Arja responds by casting a Dark Ritual. He makes 3 black mana, and then casts a Restoration Angel. It enters, targeting the Technomancer, and responding to the trigger, Mika taps it with the Marshal of Zhalfir. The Technomancer then bounces, and Arja sacrifices a Mite, making a treasure token, and then uses 2 treasures to cast a Tassin's Trophy and takes out Alenda and Azor. This lets Mika go and find a basic, and Mika then gains 6 while Kevin takes 6 from the Vampire Knight tokens. In his second main phase, Mika then casts a Knight of the White Orchard, getting a token copy, and gets to go and find 2 Plains cards to put to the field. He then taps enough to cast a main phase Return to Dust, exiling the Planar Bridge and Phyrexian Arena. He passes after that. Kevin adds his 3rd counter to the clock and draws for turn. He then taps enough to recast Vhal, and has the Noble Heritage trigger give her 2 +1/+1 counters. He then gears up the Diviner's Wand onto his commander, and then casts another wand, Wand of Absorption, and passes. Arja draws for turn, and taps a white for a Skull Clamp, which isn't as great now that his 1/1 tokens are actually 3/3s. He recasts his commander, making 3 more tokens and drawing 4 cards. Once that's done, he plays Buried Alive and goes to bin 3 creatures. We see an Orin Frostfang, Grist the Hunger Tide, and Eternal Witness going to his graveyard. It's also exiled to Kevin's wand, and once that's done, Arja then casts a Shouldered's Edict, forcing each opponent to sacrifice a creature, which is also exiled to the wand after it resolves. Arja then downticks Huatli to use the second ability on Elish Norn, pumping her massively, and he swings the mites at Mika and everything else that can swing at Kevin. Mika responds, flashing out Liliana's Standard Bearer, losing 2 and drawing 2, but finding no answer, dies to poison, while Kevin dies to normal damage, winning Arja the game. Game review time. So this was a spicy one, and I think everyone had a good time. It seemed like at one point for everyone, their deck did exactly what they wanted, and in my case, it was making a giant creature and trying to attack my opponent. I realized very quickly after this game that I needed a lot more trample, so I'm hopefully going to remedy that for the future. Arja was also incredibly excited as soon as I resolved that Primal Vigor, and I probably should have read what his commander does. All those mites certainly did a lot of work, and it was kind of funny that the Skull Clamp, which is normally one of his main draw spells, actually couldn't do a whole heck of a lot for him this game. As always, Kevin has pretty terrifying decks. Vhal and Noble Heritage means he ends up with a lot of colorless mana that he can use to activate abilities of, and with cards like Rogue's Passage and that Planar Bridge, he's going to get his best stuff to be able to do so, and it's super cool to see. I had no idea that Sidar Jabari of Zalfir had an Eminence ability until this game, but it actually wasn't that bad. Compared to Edgar Markov, which just feels kind of oppressive, this one was a lot of fun, and it works well in tandem with the payoff of when your commander connects with someone, and we haven't really seen a dedicated Knight commander in a long time. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.